The village of Ballantor is a coastal village some 595 miles from London, and it's 7 miles from my hometown of Tain. It's got no bank, it's got a fair number of elderly residents, and a bus service that is, to say the least, infrequent. So when the people of Ballantor and the neighbouring villages of Shandwick and Hilton heard that the local Spar shop would no longer provide a post office service, they were downcast, to say the least. There didn't seem to be any way to avoid the complete disappearance of the local post office. But then, step forward, one Maureen Ross. Maureen, a seaboard village local, has long been a dynamo of community work. True to form, she did not disappoint. Maureen dared to ask, couldn't the post office be part of the local community hall, the Seaboard Memorial Hall in Ballantor? It is already much used by the community and also, I might say, a provider of excellent meals and coffee. Maureen, in true form, approached the post office bosses with this innovative proposal. And fast forward, Mr. Hosey, to today, we have a successful local Ballantor post office opening 5 mornings a week. Pensions are collected, bills are paid, and cash withdrawn. It is the place where older folk can go about their day-to-day business and stop to have a cuppa and a chinwag. And touching again finally on Maureen Ross, she has protected a fundamental pillar of this particular community, and it is no surprise that a few weeks ago she was elected to be a member of the Highland Council. She is someone who recognises the fact that a network of local post offices is integral, actually, to the social fabric of our nation. Now, I have described to colleagues present here a success story, and for which I thank the post office for having seen that this happened. But now I turn to a more difficult situation. On the north coast of Sutherland, in my constituency, there are 2 local post offices at villages called Melvick and Betty Hill, and they are now worried about their viability. Until now, the Royal Mail, which is a separate organisation, has paid each of these 2 post offices I describe to have a parcel and letter sorting facility at the back of their shops. Technically, this is termed a Scale Payment Delivery Office, an SPDO. This is where posties go to sort the letters and the parcels, to avail themselves of toilet facilities, and indeed to have a sit-down to eat their piece, as we would call it in the Highlands, their lunchtime. I have been told that these contracts are due to end this coming January, leaving these shops without the funding for an SPDO. In the case of Betty Hill, the shop is going to lose a significant sum of money. It means that posties will have to meet in the public car park to sort the mail and to swap parcels between vans, and that's a pretty unpleasant prospect when you think of some of the weather that we've had recently in my constituency. When nature calls, to use the expression for our posties, they have been advised that they will simply have to use the public toilets rather than what was at the back of the shop. Now, I can tell you that in the Highlands, at this time of year, many of the public toilets are closed. So that is about the overall approach which the Honourable Member is describing, how we get all the services, the council and the government to work together. And then, what happens when there's a parcel for Mrs. Mackay on the north coast, but Mrs. Mackay isn't at home when the postie comes to deliver it? Well, now, in the past, it would go back to the local post office and be put, say in the case of Betty Hill, in a safe room and stored there. But now, it has to go all the way back to Thurso, which is a good 30 miles from Betty Hill and 17 from Melvick. And that, I might say, is far beyond the usual access criteria set by the post office, which says, and I quote, that those living in rural areas should live within 3 miles of the local branch. This is no good to my hypothetical Mrs. Mackay. She may not drive, she may be elderly, and as I've said already, she can hardly rely on public transport. I touched on earlier on, Mr. Hosey, about the loss of income to the shops. In the case of Betty Hill, that post office will lose almost £7,500 a year. This could mean, as I say already, further post office closures, but also shop closures. Pillars of rural communities demolished by cost-cutting tactics. It is what we see all too much of in the Highlands, a weary drumbeat of closures and cutting back. At the beginning of my contribution, I outlined the success story that is Councillor Maureen Ross's work to establish a post office in Ballantor. I know from having talked to the good lady, she's thinking of increasing the opening hours and has thoughts on banking, because besides the fact we have no banks in these villages at all, no branches. So could I suggest to the Minister it might be constructive if perhaps some officials from his department went and actually up there and talked to Councillor Ross and saw what Good idea she might have.